Hallo und schönen guten Abend wünsche ich euch. Herzlich willkommen heute hier auf dem Kanal. Wir werden gleich leider auf Englisch weitermachen müssen. Das liegt daran, dass wir die Simultanübersetzung nicht hinbekommen haben. Das werden wir fürs nächste Mal noch versuchen hinzubekommen. Das ist immer sehr schwierig, wenn der Übersetzer oder die Übersetzerin weiter weg ist. Das wäre nämlich die Naomi gewesen, die ihr alle kennt. Aber nichtsdestotrotz geht es auf Englisch weiter. Das heißt, für alle die es Englisch können, könnt ihr jetzt weiter dazuschauen. Wenn ihr es nicht könnt, dann werdet ihr danach direkt auf Odyssey, dem Kanal, das Ganze auch auf Deutsch sehen können, weil wir es direkt simultan übersetzen. Jetzt sage ich aber erstmal, good evening everybody, welcome to the channel, welcome to the show tonight. We have a very, very interesting guest today, and of course somebody you also know. It's a girl that you know from YouTube a lot. It's Naomi, and of course Andrew Kaufman. Here they are, you can see them now. Good evening, you both.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Yes, yeah, good to have you. Andrew, hello.
Hi, Samuel. Thanks so much. And thank you to your audience for being patient with my English tonight.
No problem, no problem. I'm sure they will understand. Why are we talking tonight? It's very interesting for me to talk to you, Andrew, because I saw your first video basically on YouTube about the matter of isolation, and it was in the context of the actual crisis that we had. Can you tell the audience where you're coming from? Like, how long have you been a medical doctor? What is your background on the situation, and how you basically came to understand that something was maybe should deserve a second look on the stuff that you read about in January, February, and March? How did you come to the point where you are right now?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. So, you know, in my career, I've done a lot of different things related to medicine. I've done research in the pharmaceutical industry. I've done computer modeling. I've done molecular biology research. I've done public health research. I was a physician assistant in working in cancer medicine. And then I was a forensic psychiatrist and in academia, and I published original research and was a peer reviewer for papers and things like that. And over the years, I came to understand the shortcomings of modern Western allopathic medicine. That in fact, I observed first, you know, from my own experience with my patients in response to psychiatric medications. And then later on, reviewing other areas of medicine, that there simply were poor outcomes. And in fact, one of the leading causes of death is medical care, according to scientific studies. So coming from that perspective, I started to back out of the medical system and study, you know, other forms of healing, natural medicine. And when the pandemic started occurring, you know, back in December, it kind of sent up some, I don't know, alert signals for me that something was special about this, because, you know, we've been through lots of announcements of various types of epidemics, right? You know, there's SARS, there's been MERS, Ebola, swine flu, bird flu,
you
Zika
name it.
virus. I mean, it keeps going on, right? And so these things come up every few years, and they generally never amount to much. They certainly have never known anyone who's been personally affected, unless it was maybe by a vaccine like the swine flu vaccine.
Sure.
But so there seemed to be something different about this, because when I traveled last February to the West Coast of the United States, I noticed in the San Francisco airport, there were people wearing masks. They were traveling from Asia, like from China or Japan or someplace, you know, overseas, because a lot of flights come into the US through the West Coast. So I just thought there's something different going on now, and I wanted to look into it. So I started looking at the scientific papers that were published about, you know, this allegedly new virus causing an illness over in China. And that's really the first time I looked carefully at what are the scientific methods that they use to show or demonstrate a new virus. Like, one, you know, we're talking about discovering a new organism, or they call it an organism or a parasitic organism, right? That's never existed before, never been known to exist. So like, imagine, you know, if there was a new kind of frog that you discovered,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
Well, how would you know that you found it?
I
Well,
mean,
you know,
you take it, you look at it, you examine it, and you discover that it's different from everything you know so far.
Right, right. And if you go in all these like natural history museums that where, people who discovered new species, like, that went to the Amazon rainforest for the first time, they of course took these specimens back, right? And they put them, they preserved them and they could, look at them and study them because they had the actual organism. So I'm expecting to see in this paper that they would actually have a virus like that, that you could like pull out a drawer, in some archive somewhere and then pull out a sample and look under the microscope and just see nothing but virus, right? Because, one thing they say about viruses is they're practically invisible because they're so small. You need the most powerful type of microscope that exists called an electron microscope to see it. And all of the tissue that you look at under an electron microscope has to be prepared in such a way that it's far gone, like it's dead and frozen and saturated with chemicals and such.
I see.
But that's the only way you can see it, right? But when I read this paper, I realized that they didn't do any such thing. Like there was no drawer that you could pull out where they had this thing. In fact, they never had it at all. Wow. And it was really perplexing to figure out, well, exactly what were they showing and then what were they doing and how did this come to existence that, this experimental method could be used to say something that it couldn't possibly conclude.
I find very interesting that in your introduction, you said that you had been doing peer reviewing. I found that very interesting because I remember when I heard peer reviewing, I immediately remembered that when Christian Drosten published his first article in January on the new coronavirus, one of the issues that people have with it is that it has not been gotten peer reviewed. That's what they say. So can you explain basically for those that are watching right now, what does peer reviewing mean and how does it work? I mean, now we have somebody firsthand who has been a part of it. That's very good to talk about.
Well, no, I've both, been reviewed by peer reviewers, right, as an author, and then I've actually been a peer reviewer for other authors on papers and for grant proposals and other things. And I mean, what you have to do is you have to look at this in context because the scientific publishing industry since the early 1980s approximately has expanded exponentially. So the number of journals and the number of specific articles published has increased so greatly that it's really overwhelmed the system. And so this is why, back in, I think it was 2008 that John Ioannidis, who is one of the foremost epidemiologists out of Stanford University, he published an article in PLOS1, a very high impact journal, stating that more than half of all scientific conclusions or results are actually false in all the published peer-reviewed literature, right? And this is very powerful. And this is one of the most widely cited articles, by the way. So it's widely accepted. But that means, that every time you look at a scientific paper, there's more than a 50% chance that its conclusions are not actually true scientifically speaking.
Wow.
And I think a big reason is because this publishing industry is so huge that there aren't enough peers and there aren't enough real scientists to create the content to fill up all the journal's pages. And so what you kind of have is like the blind leading the blind. So when I've submitted papers before, the peer reviewers have criticized it in such a way, it's clear they don't really even understand basic statistics. And then but you still have to somehow satisfy them in order to get your paper published. And then as a peer reviewer, I see that authors that put in manuscripts often don't really understand the scientific method. So their experiment is not even designed properly. And then I won't even get into the writing because that's a separate issue. But
I see.
But you can see that like the quality of the science out there has really dropped off. And so, for example, in these virus isolation papers, where this is the prima facie evidence that they offer of the existence of a brand new virus, they don't even do a control experiment.
Yes.
Right?
That's insane. If you don't mind, I have a question as well.
Yeah.
At what point did your skepticism really break out? When were you convinced that you had to leave your bubble of preconceived notions based on everything that you had learned at university, for example? Because I have the feeling, and I don't want to be patronizing towards all doctors, but that many medical experts seem to have this kind of arrogance because they think they just came out of university and now they know everything about science, and every study is super valuable and must not be questioned in any way. At least that's the conclusion that I had to come to when I tried discussing, especially the current pandemic, with medical experts. But it's more difficult for me because I'm just a 20-year-old girl with blonde hair. So obviously they tell me you know nothing. Yeah. So I'm assuming it must have been difficult for you to be a skeptic. Because you probably had many people in your field who then were maybe questioned what you had to say and were not very nice towards you.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, most of my friends who are doctors have pretty much, you know, told me off because of this. Because, you know, this basically it threatens your existence, your profession, your livelihood, your status.
Yes.
And, you know, what you say about the arrogance, I mean, it's absolutely true. And partially it's because that's what it attracts, you know, because it's a prestigious position, right? And that's part of our culture. And so it attracts that and selects the people who have the ego that want to be in that position of, you know, glory or honor or, you know, authority. And then, you know, the way that they teach you also lends itself that way. You know, they tell you that you're important, that you're, you know, a source of information and solace for people. And you even, you know, are responsible for helping people through the dying process, right? So it's a very, you know, big, and they prop you up into this role. So, you know, of course it would manifest that way. You know, it's only natural as a combination of those factors. But what they really do is they don't teach you science in medical school. They teach, I've even said this many years ago when I was going through it, it's like they teach you medical science as if they're teaching you history, where they present like the names of things and want you to memorize it. Like they actually want you to memorize the names of these really long enzymes involved in metabolic pathways. And it doesn't really add anything to your understanding of the human body to do that. But it's a rite of passage, and it distracts you from any critical analysis. So it was really, actually, it does such a good job that when I was at Duke doing my residency, and, you know, that's a little bit more of a prestigious type of place for most people, and they were serious about science, you know, in their terms. And so we had this journal club where we did a critical analysis of all these studies. And I remember after doing this, it was pretty clear that, you know, these drugs were not very effective.
Yeah.
But yet even after we discussed this and all agreed upon it at the meeting where we criticized the science, then we went back to the clinic and then we were told to just prescribe the drugs to everybody. Same ones, you know?
Wow. I mean, it's like, I read the chat, by the way, and just a second, sorry to interrupt you, Andrew. Leute, wir können das simultan übersetzen im Moment leider nicht hinbekommen. Wir haben technische Probleme dazu gehabt. Dieses Interview wird es danach definitiv auf Deutsch für euch geben. Wir arbeiten direkt dran, wenn wir fertig sind. Deswegen sprechen wir gerade Englisch miteinander. Bitte habt Verständnis dafür. Andrew, did you finish your answer to Naomi?
I think so. I don't know, Naomi, did I let any points linger?
No, that's fine. Thank you so much for answering my question.
Andrew, you were talking about control experiments. And that is also something that we understand. Naomi understands it. I do understand what it means. But could you understand for those who don't know what it is? You said you were missing the control experiments in all those publications. We know that it should be a standard to scientific working. We understand that as an instance where you can control your own results and manifest your theory or thesis. What is that special control experiment that you were talking about, or in virology especially, what was missing and how should it be conducted?
Yeah, sure. Well, just in basic terms, and this really, is like when experiment design 101, like in high school, you should learn about control experiments, I'm pretty sure. And because, an experiment is designed, you want to test, does something cause something else, right? Does thing A cause thing B? But what if, in doing this, you're using other things besides A. So you want to separate the effect of those other things so that you don't confuse the outcome. So like Tom Cowan talks about this, if you have a coffee bean and there's caffeine in it that may cause your blood pressure to go up, you want to make sure it's just the caffeine and not all the other things in the coffee. So you separate that out as a control experiment.
I see.
So in the virus thing, what they say is proof of a virus is that you mix, fluid from a sick person, like pus or lung fluid in this case, and with a cell culture and some chemicals in there, and that when those cells show that they're damaged, that means there's a virus. But they don't say exactly what in the mixture is causing the damage to the cells, because they put a lot of things that could damage cells in there, right? So one thing is the lung fluid. Now, if one control experiment would be to use the lung fluid from a healthy person. So, because the virus, if a virus causes it, it would only be in the sick person, not in a healthy person.
Absolutely.
So if you take the lung fluid from a healthy person, it would have almost the same things as the lung fluid in the sick person, except for the stuff related to the sickness. So then basically, if there's a virus in that sickness, then you would see that the cell damage would occur only from the sick person's lung fluid and not from the healthy one. So that would be a control experiment.
I see.
But that's what they do not do.
Okay. Yes, I understand. So also, as I have understood, in order to make sure that the cells are not damaged by anything else but the agents that you put in, they put antibiotics and stuff like streptomycin. I guess that's what it's called. They put in there. That is also there's also stuff from which we know that it can destroy cells. So in case of that, one control experiment would also be maybe not to add anything and then see how the cells develop, in order to make sure that the picture that we get from adding the infected fluid or whatever it is might be the only reason why the cells die. I mean, with a scheme like that, you could prove very easily, I would say, that the stuff that you put into the cells in your agent or your probe, that one is basically causing the cells to die, which make it pathogenic. But they don't do it. Now, is there any reason why they don't do it? Because I can tell you what we got as an answer from virologists in Switzerland, which are the top virologists in Switzerland. Like really those guys who make the rules in Switzerland for virology, from IVI in Bern. They answered us and said, you don't do that anymore in virology, because the process that we are using in order to prove that the agent is killing the cells is being acknowledged by the majority of scientists. That was basically the answer that we got, why they don't do control experiments. Another one.
So you mean why put the effort in if no one really cares anyway? Is that what they're saying?
Yes, exactly. They also said you would not prove anything that is expensive to prove if the majority of scientists agree that the way you do it is right. That's basically the argument that we got from them. And after explaining them that you should not confuse truth with majority, so there came back answers like, well, guys, you don't understand anything, go back to school and stuff like that. I mean, basically, or you know, the expression saying that with your mindset, you kill people because you say that might all be a lie. And therefore, if people believe you, they go out and they get infected and they die. It's your fault. So that's basically the answer. So can you explain to me, or do you have like you come from that area of science where you have a lot of experience. Can you tell me how it came to a point where people stopped doing those control experiments, or did they ever do them? Is it known to you that they did them?
Yeah. Well, so in other areas of science, like, I had published studies before, clinical studies. They weren't, in virology, but I had to have a control group, or else I couldn't even submit it to a publication. I mean, generally speaking, it's a requirement. So this is like a special exception, right? And the only thing that I can reason is why anyone would grant this kind of exception, or why scientists would make such a ridiculous, unscientific argument. Like you pointed, that's like a democratic argument. It has nothing to do with the scientific method or the philosophy or spirit of scientific inquiry. Is because if there was one control experiment done, then the whole field of virology would just collapse on itself, because it would show that you still had the same cytopathic effects with a healthy person, and so it wasn't due to a virus, and then the whole proof of the virus disappears.
So, as I
So
understand,
that's the real reason.
so
No, it's never been done. So this isolation experiments were developed by John Enders in 1954.
yes.
And it's just been repeated over and over again, never with a control experiment.
So basically, as I understand you right, you would say that virology has not a problem with corona, but it has a systematic, profound problem overall.
No, absolutely. And just to comment further about the control, that there are some articles that they put a little trick in here. And it's a pseudo control experiment that they call mock infected. Have you seen this in any of the studies? So this comes up in a few studies, and it's really fascinating because they show a picture of the cell damage. They called it cytopathic effects, right, which they say is the proof of a virus. And so they show another slide right next to it with no cytopathic effects and say that it's mock infected. This was in one of the studies I saw this.
Okay.
And then it's not described at all in the procedures section, like the methods where it describes the experimental methods. So I found out what it is it's not an actual control, it's a fake control. What they do is they, instead of lung fluid, they just put like salt water, and they don't add the antibiotics to the cell culture.
And then the cells die because from...
No, the cells don't die because they don't add any of the poisons to it. So they just have a regular cell culture with no antibiotics and no calf serum. And instead of adding any body fluid, they just add salt water, which is inert. And then they show that slide with no cytopathic effects. And they say later on, they might claim that that's a control, but it's actually not a control. It's a pseudo, control that just gives the appearance of it.
So would you say, in that very particular situation, in that publication that you've read describing that very situation that you just talked about, for my understanding, a person that does stuff like that knows exactly what he is doing?
Yes, they do.
So that would...
So that's my point, is that among at least some virologists, there is a knowledge of this criticism, and this is some attempt to counteract that. But, it's really kind of obvious if you look at it critically that it's not a real control, but it does indicate, right, that there's some understanding among the authors of this criticism.
And it's obvious when you look at their reasoning as well. So what they said was that it was too expensive, or it would take too much time. And that is ridiculous, because this is probably the most important topic that the entire world is concerned with right now. Surely you would find sponsors and some time to invest into a control experiment. It would probably take less time than arguing with us about whether or not to perform any control experiments in the first place.
It wouldn't take additional time actually, because they could do it simultaneously with the the inoculated cultures. It would be they would have to buy a few extra test tubes and extra culture medium and stuff like that. So there would be some minuscule added cost, but and then the fee to the microscopist. But we're talking about their research is funded by grants from the government. It's not like they're trying to make a profit, and grants account for funding control experiments. So that's really no excuse or reason whatsoever.
And what I think they should also do is, because they are claiming that this is a new virus now, maybe they could also use an old sample as a control experiment from a person who had an atypical pneumonia kind of disease that cannot have been this new COVID-19 thing, because it's from 2019. And if that tests positive, then obviously this is not a new disease we're dealing with. Or the test just fails entirely.
There are many experiments you could do to show this much more scientifically. It's really you could get creative with it, but the fact is that they're not willing to do that. They do the same exact experiment every time. There's really no variation in it.
So talking about this matter of fact that we just have in front of us at the moment, and then we see how Drosten started his work in January without peer reviewing, publishing through Eurosurveillance, where he is one of the publishing authorities as well, right? Considering his history that I'm sure you know about, also about 2009 swine flu, 2003, and all those kinds of things, the pandemics that happened there, pandemics. Like you've heard, I told you about our isolation fund that we did. I mean, could that be one of the reasons why he is not answering? Like, from your point of view, and that is your personal view, would you think that he is one of the guys who know what they are doing? Because I can't help myself to say he must know what he is doing, because he's done it so many times already now. I mean, he has been totally wrong in 2009 with swine flu. There has been all his forecount or foreseeing that he had in those pandemics, the prognosis, like the was sagt man nochmal? Let me say, what do you say in English? Prognose, Naomi.
Yeah, prognosis.
Prognosis, yes.
Prediction.
Predictions. Thank you. Prediction. That was the word. All his predictions that he had done didn't appear, didn't come up, like never happened. In 2009, the same in 2020. I mean, this guy has to know what he is doing. What is your opinion on him?
Well, he seems to have been involved in directing the scientists to look for, sequences that matched his 2003 SARS, sequences, which, by the way, also the same thing. There's no real evidence to support that, but they have all sorts of tricks to get these genetic sequences and make them appear like they come from a foreign organism, when really they're just something that you find in people, and they don't have a clear origin. All the sequences, they have many possible different origins, and he clearly knows how to exploit this PCR technique, which is really not something that is a diagnostic test by design. It's a manufacturing procedure to basically make genetic material. And it can so easily be manipulated because it's not any kind of test. It doesn't confirm the presence or absence of something, right? And so if you want to try to use it that way, you can easily exploit it to basically do whatever outcome you want. And so being aware of that, he put himself in a position to gain a lot of fame and fortune from propelling this kind of pandemic forward. So, it's hard to tell exactly what his real understanding is or motivations, but in terms of, challenging him to actually prove that there's, really something in a drawer, like I described it, where you can pull it out and it's the actual virus, and then you look at it under the microscope and you just see virus. and then you can pull out the RNA in one, in its
Yes.
intact form and sequence it and know exactly what the sequence is like. If you challenge him to do that, he can't do it because it doesn't exist.
Does he know?
So,
Do you think he knows it?
well, it's hard to say. If like I haven't thought about this for a really long time, and it didn't take me long to get to the point where I realized it was the scientific truth. I mean, you could try to do other experiments. Like it's not like you couldn't easily purify out a virus if it existed,
Yes.
because when it comes to exosomes or bacteriophages, there are papers that give just a million ways to purify them out of body fluids or out of bacterial culture, right? So you just go, boom, go through these methods, try, and they almost all of them involve centrifuges, but for this one, it'd be really easy because it has the ACE2 receptor. So you could actually make a special purification method based on that, like where it only takes out things that have that receptor out of a mixture. And you could very easily purify it on that basis. And they've actually used these techniques for exosomes. So they exist, it'd be really easy to do this. So why don't they do it? I mean, maybe not as easy as the experiments they're doing, which almost guarantee success, but it's not like there's plenty of other papers using these methods for exosomes and bacteriophages. So it's not like scientists aren't doing it. So if they could just simply do it for this virus, take the lung fluid, purify out the viral particles, and then show them. But so the only conclusion that you could really come to is as to why they don't do it is because they won't find anything, because there's nothing there.
I see. So, of course, did you read about the new virus that is now happening in South England? The one that is 71% more infectious as the coronavirus. Did you read about it already?
I only heard a rumor. I haven't actually read anything.
Okay, yeah. They're already closing down all traffic to England, and we've had we are searching like crazy for any publications on that virus. We haven't found anything yet, but it's very interesting that the numbers about his contagiousness and stuff like that they're already out. Everybody knows 71%, and they say
Really?
yes, and they also say that the symptoms are milder, like lower, but it's more infectious. So that's what they said. Now, even milder or like, let's say, lighter than with corona. What they say is corona. Andrew, another question that's coming up to my mind. Did you notice that flu is obviously is gone? Did you notice that? How is it in the United States? We have the flu statistics from the WHO here, and we compared the year 2019 to the year 2020, and in week 49 and 50 and 51 there should be around 12,000, 22,000 and 32,000 flu cases a week on average for Europe, and right now we are at 150. So flu is basically gone. It's deleted, it's terminated. Are you aware of that?
Well, if you want to, label every illness as COVID-19, you have to get rid of something else to make room, right?
Yeah,
So, in this, I mean, really, this is exactly what has happened. And some prominent people like Dr. Birx, who was a White House, advisor on COVID, said, we have no more flu. Right. And it's, well, how did that happen? So if you look at the numbers, and an economics professor from Johns Hopkins did an excellent analysis on there. Her name is Genevieve Briand. And she showed that basically during the peak of the deaths last spring, that each week you had a drop off in the leading causes of death, like heart disease, cancer, lung disease, things like that. And if you calculate the decrease in those other leading causes and add them all up, they equal almost the exact number as Guess what? COVID-19
Oh,
deaths.
really?
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. No, like irony off. Seriously, that's very interesting because that's what I say. I say too. If we look at the overall statistics of death cases in a country or worldwide or Europe or wherever you want to look at, and then we see what they say is the most deadly pandemic that we had ever since, or after the Spanish flu, which is another story to talk about, but not in this interview. I say, where are the deaths? Because I mean, they are not there. If you look upon if you take care, like if you watch also the economical growth of people of the people, and you put the your death cases upon per 100,000, for example, that you put them into relation, and then you add them up and see compare the years 2010 to 2020 all throughout each year, you will see that actually, for example, for Germany or for Sweden also, the years like the year 2020 is one of those with the lowest death rates in the last 11 years. If I remember right, on the target group of 70 to 79-year-old, it ranks on number 10 of the, like, going from high death rate to low death rate on number 10, and for the age group of 80 to 89-year-old, it ranks on number 10 as well in Sweden, right? And this was one of the countries who in the first place almost did not do anything, right? So thinking about that alone makes me wonder a lot. But I think it's very hard still to get it into people's heads. Now, I would like to ask you, you have a lot of, I guess, relations to people that work in science and that study those publications and work in hospitals and I don't know where. Are there some that know what's going on or have the same doubts as you do, but don't have the courage to come up with it? Or what is the, let's say, what is the mindset underneath the surface?
Well, I used to work in those kind of places and have a lot of contacts like you described, but really I'm pretty isolated these days. I mean, most of those folks have, written me off in one way or the other. There are a few people I've met, a lot of healthcare providers, since this thing has happened to, also realize what's going on. And, listen, I'd have to say that almost everybody who's working in healthcare must realize that this is a sham, because they see empty hospitals across the country. And, I mean, what you were saying about the mortality, like, I mean, this is really what gives the whole thing away. If there's no increase in the number of people dying in the whole year compared to prior years, well, then there's no health emergency, right? So why do we have, the end of business? Why do we have the end of freedom when there's actually no emergency? Even if there was a new disease and let's say it caused people to not die of the flu and cancer and instead die of pneumonia, all right, well, that's not so bad.
Yes.
It's like still the same number of people dying. So you mentioned the 1918, so-called Spanish flu. Well, at that time, people did see people dying all around them. I mean, you can read accounts of people, but basically the cemeteries were full and people had to bury their family in their backyard, like they do with pets. I mean, we're not, if we didn't have TV and masks right now, no one would know that anything is different from any other year.
Yes.
If you open up your eyes and look around you, and even like, they say, oh, well, Uncle Joe, who was 90, died of COVID. And, that guy down the street who is old, or the guy with cancer died of COVID. It's like, just forget about the COVID, just say those people died, and it's like, okay, every year we know about people who die, especially when they're old and especially when they have cancer. It's not, that doesn't mean anything.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So people just aren't paying attention and trusting their own observations. And part of these policies is to keep us separate from each other so we can't, sit and have these discussions. And hey, you realize that there's no one dying or sick? Why are they making us do all these things? That if you just simply allow that, people to get together, I think it'd be much easier to see some of this about what's going on. But with all the medical people, it's like they feel like, oh, geez, they're paying me to be quiet. Anyone who speaks out gets in trouble. They lose their license, right? Even the senator who's a doctor, Scott Jensen, like he got threatened with his license. You have Dr. Adil in the UK, who just for speaking about things, questioning things, he loses his medical license, right? So those are examples for everyone to see that, you better keep, even if you realize something's going on, just keep your mouth shut if you want to keep your license and your job.
And here's something that I came across very recently that I would like to add, a new publication from the World Health Organization, in which they actually admitted that the PCR tests are very inaccurate. And so they said that you had to take into account symptoms as well. So first of all, obviously that eliminates the entire narrative about asymptomatic carriers that need to be quarantined as well if they test positive. And secondly, if you need to take into account symptoms because the test apparently doesn't work, what are those symptoms? They are just generic flu symptoms. So couldn't it just be the flu if the test doesn't work? But people don't seem to realize that and really put two and two together, because the people in charge and people like Professor Drosten, they make themselves out to be those huge authority figures and our big leaders that we need to follow, because the way they lead us, they use fear mongering, and they tell you if you celebrate Christmas with your grandparents, they're going to die in 2 weeks. That's atrocious, and that's completely dehumanizing. Also about this new mutation, the alleged mutation in the UK right now, I saw some articles about people who are from Germany who are now returning from the UK to go back to Germany and celebrate Christmas in Germany. And some of them tested positive for this new mutation COVID thing at the border. And now they are staying at the airport and they have to sleep at the airport. And they sent out tweets, social media messages asking for help because they're not allowed to go home. So maybe they will have to spend Christmas with their children at the airport in completely uncomfortable beds. They're not being taken care of just because of this mutation thing. It's it's very dehumanizing.
It's worse than that, Naomi, because so if they want to really make it seem like this thing is lethal, they have all these people in one place. Well, all they have to do would be to put some type of gas in the air, or they're going to give them food or put some poison in the food or water, and then they would all be sick, right? And then they would say it was some, mutated strain that, and then they could use that to further scare the people and intimidate them into more drastic measures. So
and that's the point when people will tell you are a conspiracy theorist. But it's very realistic, unfortunately.
Yeah, because how could they so fast discover a new strain that's mutated and have a test for it before they even, report on the effects of it?
Yes.
Right? Like, did they put it out there, or did they just put a story out there that this exists, that was pre-planned and they had it in their pocket ready to go? Because, there's plenty of documentation about planning, for this type of a campaign. Even Fauci said it right at the beginning, right before the first inauguration of President Trump 4 years ago. He said that he guarantees there was going to be a surprise outbreak during the next 4 years.
Yes.
Right. And that's exactly what happened. And he's been in the United States, the one in charge of it, pretty much.
And they were just as fast with the first coronavirus at the beginning of 2020. It took Drosten 3 days to produce primers for the PCR test, just based on social media reports. It says that explicitly in the publication about his PCR test.
Correct.
Yes, they were totally, without him having any material or data from the current situation, he developed that test.
Yes.
Absolutely, based on, sequences from a computer. So it's pure fiction, the whole thing. But, this is actually why it's such an important point to debunk this whole virus dogma. because they can use this procedure over and over again to just invent new viruses and then make any kind of claims about them. And, you know, even if they could easily show a bunch of people dying in one location from a variety of causes and just then say it's from this, and then, you know, that fear comes about, and then they keep going with this, you know, round and round. So now we have this one vaccine, and then there's going to be a mutation. Then there needs to be another vaccine and more strict lockdowns and other procedures, right? And it'll just keep escalating and escalating. And anyone, you know, who says that that's a conspiracy, I mean, just pay attention to what's going on, because I was saying the same thing back when we were told that these precautions would be for 2 weeks, right? And every time there was a new assault to our freedom, and every time it was extended further, right? And every time they changed the
Yes.
story, it's the same thing. So how long are you going to buy their story for?
Absolutely. I mean, Andrew, another thing that I wonder, you have heard about Tiffany Dover, I think. Do you know the
It
name?
doesn't ring a bell, no.
Okay, that was the woman that got vaccinated and 17 minutes later collapsed. Does it ring a bell now?
Yes, I'm familiar with that story, and I think it was in Tennessee.
Yes, exactly. I mean, my question to you now is there any information circulating in the United States? Because I found a very interesting detail about her. I didn't know that in the United States you got a thing called search query. You know that one? That is that is a portal basically where you go. You can put in any name of any citizen of the United States that you know. For example, also Andrew Kaufman. You know your age and where you live. Then you can find you. They can find you. You click on get the data, and then they know all about your history, crime history, all the records and stuff. Because
Right, yeah.
they say like, sorry.
Yeah, we call that a background search.
Yes, exactly. I mean, search query is one of those. You know what's very interesting? I can put in your name or my brother-in-law's name or whatever, and it will come up. The time I put Tiffany Dover in there, it tells me that the system is overloaded because for any technical reason. If I put 5 seconds later another name in again, the results show up again. I put Tiffany Dover again, it is technical problems. I put 3 other names, the results show again. I put Tiffany Dover again, it's technical problems. That's very interesting. I found that very, very interesting.
It certainly is.
Yes, because it's rumored now in Germany that 10 hours later, Tiffany Dover was dead. Since then, there is no Instagram post from her anymore. The hospital hasn't put her in front of a camera. I mean, what would have been easier than that? I mean, everybody's talking about she might have been dying or she died, and there's a vaccine now coming up that should be dangerous or not, or maybe it is or not. What's more difficult or more easy than putting her in front of a camera and saying, "Hi, I'm fine. Here I am. Don't worry about me.
Right.
It's good." I mean,
yeah, well, that, you know, it was suspicious because I think that they tried to say that she faints a lot from pain or other things, right? But certainly if she was dead, then that was more than fainting.
yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, if that did happen, it would be great if it would be substantiated. But the truth is, we really already know that there are deaths that have been caused by the vaccine from the trials.
Wow.
So there were 2 deaths. And then we know that there have been several people with anaphylactic reactions, which is a life-threatening allergic reaction, who have been treated in the intensive care unit. So I think, you know, that's more than enough data to say that there's the potential of lethality from the vaccine.
Yes.
And what are they going to do if it doesn't work, which obviously it's not going to work as a vaccine? They're just going to say those people who got the vaccine and then get COVID or the flu or whatever, again, they're just going to say this is a new mutation of COVID and we need a new vaccine. And then the same game is going to happen again.
Well, you know, there's so many ways that they can change the narrative. Like, for example, if they just decide to change the testing protocol and do fewer amplification cycles, right? Well, then they could just decrease the number of cases. So if they want the vaccine to look successful, they can do that and then show fewer cases and say, look, it works. right? So, but if they, people are still getting sick, or there's no change or anything they could point to, they could have all kinds of explanations if things get worse, that there was a mutation, the vaccine no longer works, right? Or they're getting more data and they thought the vaccine was more effective and now it's less effective, so switch to the Moderna, and then now you got 2 shots of the Pfizer, and now you got to get 2 shots of Moderna also. Like, there's so many ways it could be manipulated and spun in the future that it's really hard for me to predict. But I think, the result will be that it'll be harder and harder to say no to the vaccine, and then there'll be more and more vaccines that are required, especially for adults who previously didn't have any required.
I see. Guys, we are already 55 minutes up already. I mean, time is flying. It's been a very interesting conversation. Andrew, if we manage, let's assume for a second. I mean, I've told you about the Drosten Isolate Fund, one of my
Yes.
of my most cherished children or projects at the moment. We have around $200,000 in the fund already now. If by any means Christian Drosten or anybody else would say, okay, let's get together and go for control experiments, go for an alignment, go for let's assume for a second that it would happen. Would you be on a team that would join us in order to check out what's going on, to confirm that everything is going correct? Would you work with it? Would you work with us on it? If we would invite you, of course.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, if that opportunity would be, something I would certainly jump at the chance to do. I mean, you're saying that I could oversee the control experiments performed by Drosten.
Yes.
Yeah, that would certainly be a dream come true of sorts, although a strange dream. But yeah, I would even do that without charging for my time.
Oh, that sounds very good. So then we would welcome you pretty much. So I will keep you all updated on that. I can tell you that already. I have talked recently on last Friday. I talked to one of the highest decorated physicians or medical doctors for public health, WHO, for 20 or 30 years in Africa and stuff. And he told me that he is in very close contact to Drosten since 20 years. And he told me also that he would help me to approach him on this matter, because I know
Really?
that he read about that. He's seen it on Twitter because he answered to our posts on the website and stuff like that. So if there's a chance that we get that done, or any adequate virologist at this level who would do those experiments with us, I would be very glad to have you on the team in order to get like let's say 5-6 people from our side together with the guys from the other side, and we would go and search into virology and see what's underneath and see what we can really prove and what we can't.
I'll tell you, if I were a virologist, I would actually, like this opportunity, because, someone like me, now I don't purport to be any kind of leading expert. Like, I'm just a guy who has done some science, and I can read an article and interpret it. And I try to, tell people what the science says about something. But I don't know all the answers, and I make mistakes, just as well. But I would think, the virologists or the mainstream seems to be a bit threatened by some of the things I say, because they go to great lengths to try to debunk me, even sometimes bring on mainstream scientists to debunk a claim that I make. So why not come to a forum? Like, let's have a public discussion, and let a university host it even. Like, you have the Maudsley debates at King's College in London, right? Like, that would be a great type of forum. And, bring on 3 virologists who want to talk, and let's just have a discussion about, explain how these methods actually prove what you say they prove. And, we'll make some points and, see if we can illuminate the audience about it. I think if they really believe in what they do, they should, and we're totally, baseless, it should be easy to dismiss our claims.
Absolutely.
I would think. But that's something I would take very seriously. I wouldn't, go up there, with ad hominem attacks or changing the subject. I would just want to talk science.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's what I told Christian Drosten in reply to his tweet also, and said, look, it's not about bashing anybody or accusing. It's about, we have like this crisis is affecting everybody in the whole world. It's like, if you want it or not, this one is about life and death. It's about serious matters. It's about economy. It's about the future. It's about everything. And we know what's going on right now and how many changes are done and all those kinds of things. I mean, the least thing that we could do is get into a point where we have a foundation on which we can agree and from which we can make our assumptions and our decisions. But so far, we don't have that basis. Nothing that has been claimed that either would have been isolated or proven or whatever is there. As much as you look for it, it's not there. And that would be a goal, and that's the goal that I want to achieve with that fund. So far, Drosten has not reacted yet. But I have hope, maybe, that he might. But if you say that he knows what he's doing, and I think so too, I think it might be hard for him to accept our claim, because then, I mean, in Germany we say, you don't saw down the leaf where you sit on, or, you know, the part of the tree where you sit on, you don't put the saw on and you just cut it off. So then you fall down to the ground. That's kind of a picture where I say, yeah, that it might fit that situation pretty well.
Don't underestimate yourself though, Andrew. Surely you are way more experienced and know way more, are way more of an expert than 90% of those pseudo virologists, whatever they claim to be, honestly. That most of them are book smart, maybe. Like you said before, that's the education system. Unfortunately, they read their books, they read what's put in front of them, but they don't question the studies that they read and their advice. Hang on a second. I think my phone is
ringing,
collapsing right now. Okay, it's fine. But to our German followers, some of you might not know this, but Andrew is actually kind of a celebrity in overseas when it comes to this type of stuff, this virology skepticism. So you're really dealing with a celebrity here.
That's good. I think so too, because
well, that disqualifies me scientifically, doesn't it?
Well, you know, after German rules, if you are a virologist celebrity, you get the highest medals and honors of our Chancellor Merkel. As I can prove to you by looking at the history of Christian Drosten, he already has 2 Bundesverdienstkreuze, which is the highest ranking honor that you can get from the German state. And guess what? He got it just this year because he was communicating so well to everybody and explaining everything. So,
wow.
Yes, that's what he got, the Bundesverdienstkreuz. Yes. So
he deserves the same praise as Governor Andrew Cuomo in my great state of New York. I'll tell you that.
The same thing?
Yes, the same praise.
Yeah, you see, I think we might have similar problems overseas and here. As I say, yes. we should go for profound knowledge. And basically, I mean, that's what I always said. If a teacher or somebody who is very smart in his area is not able to explain things to somebody who doesn't understand it and just wipe away all the doubts, even if it takes a little bit longer, then there must be something wrong. Because if somebody can understand it who is human, another human can too. It's just a matter of time. That's what I'm convinced of, you know? And
yes.
I mean, I started watching your videos. I start to read myself on things, on publications, how to get into them, how to understand them, see what is happening, get through the sections and all those kinds of things. And I might not be 100% at it yet, but I have understood where I have to look and what I have to look upon. And I can see what those publications are missing. And therefore, you don't have to be a scientist. It's just not
That's
there,
right.
You know? Everybody can understand.
You're exactly right. I mean, the hardest thing about reading these articles is the language that they use. It's like, you know, a foreign language, except there's not like a dictionary, you know, that goes from virology to English.
Right? Yes, absolutely.
If it was
absolutely.
French,
yes.
You could do it. But you know, so you have to like figure out what they mean. And then even within the, you know, like, it's not just like, even other biologists can't easily read their papers.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because they have their own ways of describing things. And even like what the isolation experiment is, it's like they say that, and other biologists read that and they're like, oh, I don't really, it's not isolation. I don't, I'm just going to kind of go read something else. And but once you get past that, it's just really like logic and reasoning. Like everybody can use logic and reasoning, right? Everybody knows that 2 + 2 = 4. And so if you just think about it from that approach, you'll be like, I don't get it.
Yes.
What? Okay, let me look at that again. They're saying what?
Absolutely.
Right. That's and that's all you need. Because if you read a paper that's well done, like the Danish mask study, for example, and that study, was refused publication by 3 different journals. And it is the highest quality study done on masks in COVID. It's the only one done on real subjects, like not a computer model or not like a retrospective data that's already, just pulling data. So this is a real study, and it was by the book. Like it followed every step for this, like the same exact method that was done in many other published studies for like the flu and colds. And, this is like highly criticized, and they had to change their language to be ridiculous, just to get it published. And so it's like you can see the influence of the political or global narrative is, affecting the science in a big way, like so obviously in this case. Like the language that they used and got published in that Danish mask study, like if I would have handed that in my intro to statistics class, in college, like the entry-level class, it would have failed, because they wrote ridiculous things. They wrote that a confidence interval represented real numbers, in there that crossed over 100 or 0. Like they said that it went in both directions, the relationship.
Yes.
It's just kind of like, in other words, they said it both decreases and increases infections wearing a mask. Like that's, a little bit illogical. But that's the only way that they would allow it to be published, because they couldn't publish something that was only negative about masks.
Yes.
But so this is where we're at with, what they say science is.
I see. I understand. Yes, I would say, guys, now we are over an hour on. And I think the people they are following very close. I see the chat. Many people say they cannot understand, but there will be a translation for those of you who cannot understand English pretty well. We will work on that right after this interview is done, and we'll publish it on the Odyssey channel. Also for those, and that's something that I just want to mention once again, I see a couple of people saying, yes, Samuel, you don't see the German Institution of Statistics. They proved now that there are 9% more people dying than in the years before and stuff like that. Guys, it's very important that you watch according to the rate of 100,000, because there are much more people in Germany now as there were 10 years ago. So even the persons that are above 80 years or 70 years have grown by, I guess it was 29%. So if more people die compared to 2010, guess what? It's normal, because we have many more people, right? So that's what we have to look upon.
Samuel, this, I like to comment, because this could be a really kind of a tricky thing to figure out, because obviously we don't have the same exact number of people dying every year, right? That would be next to impossible in the size of our populations, right?
Yes.
So how do you tell, that one year is different from the other? Well, definitely, if the population is growing rapidly, then you definitely have to look at it per capita, per 100,000 population, or per person, what's the death rate, to compare apples to apples.
Yes.
But there are some of these agencies also try to trick you. So like the CDC does this. They have a table which gives the mortality for 2020, and then they have a column in there that says percent of expected deaths. So in other words, if it's more than 100, then there's excess deaths. And if it's, 100, then it's the same as prior years. But the thing is, that doesn't just compare it to the past years, like on average. It's actually a statistical model.
Yes.
And so what they did is, when you have a statistical model, that means you can tweak it. Okay, because you can put in the values for different variables or constants such that it changes the model, or you can include or exclude aspects to change the model. So what I've done is, and Genevieve Briand has done, and they criticized her based on this, by the way, but she looked at the actual data for the past years since 2014, and she saw that it's not different. And if you look at it on a graph, you can pretty much see that right away, that, oh, everything is the same, nothing sticks out in terms of the total numbers. But when you compare it to this statistical model, they've tweaked it to make it look like there were fewer deaths in the past years. And so it keeps going above 100. And if you look at that number, you'll be fooled. But if you look at the total number and then just say compare it to 2018 in the US, you'll be like, oh, it's the same exact number of deaths.
Yes.
So it's not really different.
I'm very grateful also for 2018, because the year 2018, you have to see in Germany, around on a normal day, around 2,600 people die. In 2018, in the early year 2018, we had a couple of weeks in the beginning of the year where we had up to 1,000 more deaths per day over a period of 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, right? That is so high that even now, with a bigger population and anything that we had, also the spikes, we don't reach that, right?
Right.
And that makes it, to me, very interesting, because I would say then, why didn't we do anything in 2018, right? When we had 1,000 deaths on top of 2,600 normal. That would mean that we are running about 33, 35, 38% higher death rate per day or per week as we would usually expect, right? So I get your stuff with the models. I have to say, I guess one of the words in 2020 that I hate most is model and expected calculation,
Right.
because
Yes.
it's one of those things that Drosten is using in every second phrase. And everything that he expects or predicts or sees coming, or models have shown, or calculations have proven, was leading us up to 1 million deaths in Germany. And in Austria, everybody would know anybody who would have died of COVID. I think we should come back to the sick person on the bed, go away from a laboratory medicine back to a practical one, see who has symptoms, talk about the peripheral reasons for it, not declare somebody sick because you have a PCR who says, I found maybe something that I don't know what it is, but it's there, and therefore he is a patient. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think we would.
I want to, if I may, like
Sure.
you were saying, even during the 2013, like just to see how you could be really fooled by numbers. So, that there were an extra 1,000 deaths a day for a period of several weeks, right?
Yes.
So at the time that's happening, like, would you even notice that? Because I would bet in Germany, there's at least 1,000 hospitals, probably more, right? So
Yeah, I don't even know.
in the whole nation, right? So that would only be one death in each hospital extra. That's not going to be noticeable by anyone.
Yes.
Right. So if that happened, unless you were collecting data for the whole country and then you saw a blip, you wouldn't even notice a change like that.
Absolutely. I mean,
right. It's like when you say, 1,000 deaths a day, it sounds really extreme, but you don't realize how many people that's out of, that it's out of 80 million people or 100 million people.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I get your point. Okay. I'd say if nobody has any more questions or anything to say, I would say thank you very, very much for the time, Andrew, for being with us, Naomi, for joining us. We will now work on the translation for everybody. I'm sure we'll stay in touch and we'll discuss further issues on the topic, because I think we are running into some very interesting developments recently. But for today, I would say thanks a lot for joining, for sharing, for commenting and sharing your information and discoveries. I wish you still a great evening, Andrew, because yeah, you are approaching evening now. And Naomi, to you, a good night and thanks for joining the show today.